Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good evening. It is 9:30 p.m. here in Calgary, Alberta, Monday night, November the 15th, and this is Child Abuse Prevention, and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is up to us. It's a 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and I have the chat room open with a link in there that I wanted to talk about tonight. And I wanted to kind of take a look at what is psychological abuse of a child and the impact of psychological abuse that children might suffer from, in an emotional or psychological abusive situation or home. It's such a huge issue. It's so hard to prove. And, if a parent, let's say, or a grandparent or somebody in the family, suspected that there was psychological abuse and maybe even knew there was psychological abuse going on and that a child was being abused psychologically, it's really hard to prove. It's extremely hard to prove, and you have to have it, and really you need to have it all documented, and you need to know what to look for, the signs, the symptoms, and keep a real close eye on your children, you know what I mean? We have to protect children. We have to do whatever we can to protect children from all the different types of abuse, whether it's physical, verbal, sexual, psychological, emotional, child abuse, and neglect, right? We have to protect children, right? So we need to know, really what are the different types of child abuse? What are the signs and symptoms, right? So I want to take a look at psychological abuse of children, right? And so that's what we'll be looking at tonight. Thanks to everybody for tuning into my shows. I really appreciate it. And I have almost 15,000 shows listened to now, and it's just amazing. I thank you all for tuning in, and I do appreciate it. I don't know who a lot of you are and who are tuning into my shows regularly, but I really appreciate it. And it's almost a year for me. November the 22nd will be 1 year that I've actually been doing Blog Talk Radio, and I had no idea I'd be doing Blog Talk Radio for a year. I was thinking a couple months, I might do it for 2 or 3 months and see how it went. So thank you so much for being here with me. I really appreciate it. And I'm not a counselor or therapist or anything. I go through this on every show, and I'm just a private citizen, paying to do these shows, to bring out, education, awareness, and, to talk about the issues of child abuse and human rights abuses, right? Because child abuse is a human rights abuse, right? Children have rights, and we all have rights, men, women, children, we all have rights, right? These are our human rights. And so I like to cover really them all. And so I want to take a look at psychological abuse tonight, just because a lot of stuff I've been reading and just a lot of stuff just seeing out there, and even in my own life, the whole issues of psychological abuse has been pretty heavy duty on me as a survivor of child abuse. But I know so many kids actually are suffering in this and do suffer in it, and a lot of people might not realize what it is. And that's why I thought, well, we'll go through and talk about it here tonight. So if you're a young person under the age of 18, I ask that you have permission to listen to my show from an adult, somebody who's older, who can help you make the decision whether you should be listening. And if everyone needs to listen at their own discretion, because I talk about everything to do with abuse. My shows are pretty sensitive, and so because I just tell it like it is, and I don't minimize anything, and I don't sugarcoat anything, So the topics of abuse are very sensitive, and you do have to know what's good for you to listen to. And so if you think it might bother you or make you uncomfortable, the topic or just the show, you have to turn it off, because that is your discretion, right? So everybody needs to be in a safe place and know what's good for them to listen to, right? So this particular website, healthyplace.com, has an interesting article about psychological abuse of a child, and I've probably read through it quite a few times, and just over the years, just looking at it, and especially the last 2 years. And so I've seen this article before. It was posted November 23rd, 2008, written by healthyplace.com, a staff writer. And it's called What is Psychological Abuse of a Child? And you can get this by going to their website, www.healthyplace.com, healthy, just like it sounds, Health, healthy, place, place.com. And I have the link in the chat room, so we'll get right into this. I'm just really going to read from the page and then, of course, throw in my own stuff, because that's what I always do. And so I just wanted to take a look at what is psychological abuse, and then the impact of psychological abuse on a child, right? So surprisingly, psychological or emotional abuse of a child can have more long-lasting negative psychiatric effects than either physical abuse or sexual abuse. It says learn about the types and symptoms of psychological abuse. And I think the issue there is that with physical abuse and sexual abuse, there will always be psychological abuse present. And the psychological damage that's done there is quite often what is so extremely hard for children to overcome, to learn how to heal and to move on from that. You know what I mean? Because it's the whole psychological damage of being physically abused. It's the whole psychological damage of being sexually abused. It's the whole psychological damage that's done from being verbally assaulted, from being not wanted, neglect. Psychological abuse. I mean, it is major, and so many adults suffer in these situations. So, and we know that children do as well. And it's very, very hard on children. It's hard for them to then, because it shapes and forms their world. You know what I mean? This is a child who experiences enough abuse in a home without anybody stepping in or interfering, and saying, look, the way that you're being treated is not right, and, it's abuse, and it's not right, and this is not how we're supposed to be thinking, this is not how we're supposed to be acting. If a child grows up in a very psychologically abusive home, then that's their normal, that's their reality, that's their day-to-day life, right? And so then they have to try to get along and cope if they live and survive the abuse within the home. They have to learn how to then cope as an adult in this world, with these issues, right? So it's very, very serious. Psychological abuse is a pattern of intentional verbal or behavioral actions or lack of actions that convey to a child the message that he or she is worthless, flawed, unloved, unwanted, endangered, or only of value to meet someone else's needs. Withholding emotional support, isolation, or terrorizing a child are forms of psychological abuse. Domestic violence that is witnessed by a child is also considered a form of psychological abuse. And they said psychological abuse is often divided into 8 categories defined as, then they list them off here, and this is basically the same kind of stuff that, is on the domestic violence and abuse websites, right? It's rejection, scorn, terrorism, isolation, corruption or exploitation, the absence of emotional response, and then neglect, right? Exposure to domestic violence, right? And showing a lack of regard for the child, right? So it's just all these things. And, it's absolutely horrible for anyone to live through, especially a child, and for anyone, adults or children. No one should be treated like this, right? So I'll just read what they have to say here about rejection. To reject a child, to push him away, her away, right? To make them feel that, the child is useless or worthless. To undermine the value of the child's ideas or feelings, and to refuse to help the child. Just complete rejection, just pushing them away, making them feel useless, worthless, undermining their value of their ideas and their feelings, right? Their feelings don't count, they don't matter. Refusing to help children, refusing to help them, right? Period. It just shows the child, hey, I'm not wanted, I am not accepted, I'm not needed, I'm not, it just pushes the child completely away. I know exactly what that's about. And it's hard on children because the whole idea of a family, is it's this unit, right, with all of these different people in it, and each one of them should have equal, as far as value and worth goes, every one of them should all have the same equal value and worth, right? So if a child's being rejected, they see this and they, if they're the only ones and they're sort of centered, like maybe the rejection is sort of centered on one child but not the other, which can happen in blended families and whatnot, and step families, and that child will be like, well, they want the other children but they don't want me, right? And so, and I also know what that's also about, see, so I know about all about this stuff, right? Scorn, it says to demean the child, to ridicule them, the child, right, to humiliate the child, to cause the child to be ashamed, to criticize the child, and to insult them, right? And scorn, scorn is a weird word to me because I never really understood what the word meant. I heard people say, oh, it's, somebody's scorn or whatever. The word didn't mean much to me, but when somebody says anything about demeaning a child, ridiculing a child, humiliating a child, criticizing a child, insulting a child, this totally makes sense to me because that's what happened to me. And so many children are put through this, on a regular basis by, whether it's one parent or two. Sometimes it's both parents and they're both ridiculing the child and they're both insulting the child. Sometimes it's just one. But, very sad that people would do this to a child. Children are not put on this earth to insult and to criticize and to be, to cause them to be feeling humiliated and ridiculing them and demeaning them all the time, right? Children are not put on the earth to do that too. And why do people do it then? You see so many parents do that to their children, and they don't even stop to think what they're doing. Like out in public, you'll see somebody, and they're not necessarily, you almost can't even classify it as abuse, and if they just get away with it, demeaning their child, like making them feel really small, because of something that they've done or something that they didn't do, right? And you just look at those people and you're just like, why would you treat your child like that? It's just completely wrong. And so if you know of a child who's being treated like this, it is abuse. And we have to be able to recognize what abuse is and what it isn't. And, a lot of people think this is just the way people treat children. Society's view of abuse is just so, I don't know, on purpose backwards. People don't want to know about it because then they'd have to face it within their own homes. They'd have to be like, well, how am I treating my children? Then they'd have to face their own past abuse. Maybe they don't want to do that. So they just, they just pretend that all of this just doesn't exist when we all know that it does. And it happens within the home mainly. And the sad part is that, this is almost 2011. Can we not wake up and smell the coffee? That this is incredibly wrong. And people need to think before they speak. And they also need to think before they act with their children. A lot of times people just lash out at their children for whatever reason. And no parent's perfect and no child is perfect, right? But I think, there's a real fine line between abuse and discipline. And a lot of parents think it's discipline and they're crossing the line and it becomes abuse, because when you hurt a child and you harm a child, or an inaction, so it's either an action or an inaction that harms or hurts a child, that's abuse by law. That's the definition. So I wish parents would just watch what they're doing with their children, you know what I mean, and not abuse their children. And, sometimes you do have to scold, and you have to let them know that what they've done is wrong, so as far as scolding goes, that's what I mean, not berating the child. We're talking, if a child's doing something that they shouldn't be doing, which they do quite often, right, because I know I was a child and I was always doing stuff I shouldn't be doing. Most kids are like that. I think there's probably a few kids that aren't like that, but, most children are. And so, of course, they're going to need the parent to step in and say, look, what you're doing is wrong, and we're going to have to sit down and talk about it. Because, instead of just slapping the kid across the room, taking off your belt and beating the crap out of them, you got to teach them a lesson, or screaming at them, calling them names, tossing them in their bedroom and slamming the door and throwing things at them. And this is, pathetic behavior, but that's what so many people do because they don't stop to think what they're doing to that child. They just think, oh, it's all about me. Oh, that child's making me mad, or that child's really got on my last nerve here today, or, and so it's like the child becomes a punching bag. It's like, go out. Parents should just go out and buy themselves a punching bag, put it down in the basement, and when they need to go and beat on something, go down there in the basement and beat on a punching bag and stop beating on their children and their partners, right? Because this is absolutely ridiculous. And as far as the physical insults go, you want to call your child names, you better just go downstairs to the basement and yell at the pillow, because your child does not deserve to be treated like that. And no child does, you know what I mean? So it's very, very serious, and the damage that's done is really very detrimental to their lives, you know what I mean? And people don't realize it. Terrorism, to threaten a child or someone who is dear to him with physical abuse, abandonment, or death, to threaten to destroy the child's possessions, to place the child in a chaotic or dangerous situation, to define strict and unreasonable expectations, and to threaten the child with punishment if they do not comply, right? And that's terrorism. And that's just bad, you know what I mean? When parents just threaten their children and just constantly keep them terrorized, if you don't stop this, I'm going to have to do this, I'll have to string you up, I'll have to, all these threats of physical violence, right? Or abandonment. I'll leave you. If you don't behave yourself, I'll leave you on the next corner or whatever. And sometimes death, threatening their kids with death, saying that they will kill them or whatever. And that's, I grew up with that. So I know exactly what that's all about. And that's a horrible way to live, knowing that your parents are telling you that if you weren't so bad, they wouldn't have to be thinking that they should have killed you years ago, this type of stuff, right? Or that they should kill you just because they're that mad, I should kill you, right? I mean, I grew up hearing that, so, and it's not funny, and the damage done is incredible. Like, it's it's not right for parents to tell their kids that they should kill them or that they deserve to be dead. My mom used to tell me that she wished I had died, right, as a child, right? And that's sad, that's pathetic. And so many parents actually do that to their children because they're so stressed out and upset and angry themselves that they don't even know how, really honestly. I mean, I guess they could say that they do know what they're doing, but in the back of my mind, I think that they're so psychologically messed up that they don't know what they're doing. You know what I mean? They're not thinking about what they're doing to that child. They're just lashing out to hurt someone, anyone, and it happens to be the child, right? And that's just very sad. Isolation, to physically or socially isolate a child to limit his or her opportunities to socialize with others. And that's very sad. Like I knew kids like that. I grew up with kids like that who were not allowed to play, really couldn't even leave their porch. They weren't allowed to play with so many children. Could only have one friend over, keeping them kind of isolated or no friends, and you wouldn't see them for months. They'd just be hidden away. You'd be like, I'd go and knock on the door, and some of these parents would come to the door and be like, nope, they're not allowed to play with you guys anymore. They'd just keep them all isolated, and that's very sad. Like I didn't, we were not isolated as children. We were allowed to go run around the neighborhood because I think our parents were thinking it'd be great if we all disappeared, right? They didn't care. They were like, good, go out. If you come back, whatever, but we'd rather you don't. You know what I mean? Sad enough, but that's true. But the thing is so many children are actually, that is abuse, to confine, to socially isolate, to limit their options, their opportunities to interact with their own peers. And also, it's very damaging because it limits their interaction with adults, right? And children do need to learn how to interact with people, period, of all different ages, And so, for them to grow, and to be able to learn how to handle themselves around certain situations, and how to deal with adults and how to deal with children, they do need to have that. So, keeping children isolated is not a good idea. I mean, sometimes you kind of have to. I guess there's kids that would grow up on a ranch out in the middle of nowhere, and the circumstances are different. We're talking about a form of abuse where somebody would do that because they wanted to completely control the child, so they would never let them out of their sight because they would just be constantly wanting to control what that child did all day long and who they saw and who they talked to. And a lot of times when there's a lot of physical abuse or child sexual abuse going on, that's when the parents or whoever the abuser is will do that. They'll isolate the child because they don't want the child talking to anybody to tell them what's happened, and they don't want anybody to see the bruises if it's a lot of physical abuse or even sexual abuse. They don't want people to start noticing bruises and welts and burns or things like this, right? And so they'll hide the child, and they won't, even from the family, like they won't let certain family members come around because they'll be like, they don't want the child to disclose that something's going on or that for people to see the abuse, right? So isolation is a real problem regarding children and child abuse. Corruption or exploitation, to tolerate or encourage inappropriate or deviant behavior, to expose the child to antisocial role models, to consider the child as a servant, to encourage the child or coerce them to participate in sexual activities. And this is absolutely pathetic and so wrong that people would do this to their children. And we know it's happening all over the place, and the FBI and ICAC and everybody else is all over it, thank God. And I hope that they bust every single one of those people doing that. That is just so wrong to do to a child, to treat a child like a commodity. It's like, to exploit them, to expose them, you know what I mean? To have them participating in child pornography and child sex trafficking. But there's parents out there that do it, and we see the headlines rolling out. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and we cover the headlines on Tuesdays and Fridays. We're always looking at the headlines. They're posted all the time all over the place, and from other advocates and people that we know and groups that we know that are working to stop child abuse, right? Lots of parents sell their children for, a few bucks, right? And they'll sell their children to a child, like a sex trafficker, And it's great when they get busted, you know what I mean, and save the kid. But you know how many kids out there are not saved, and they end up in these sex rings and these child pornography rings, and it's absolutely horrific. And no child deserves that. No adult necessarily deserves that, but no child does, because they don't have the choice. Nobody's asking them, hey, do you want to go be a sex slave victim? I mean, it's like, sure, no kid's gonna, you know what I mean? It's like they don't have a choice. They have to just go along with whatever's going on, and that's the sad part. Adults, I don't know, they get tricked into it. You know what I mean? They get taken into it because of the drugs or the money or the whole, crazy lifestyle type of thing, right? People looking to live on the edge all the time. I mean, I knew lots of people like that. And it's sad enough to see adults go into that, or young adults and even teens. But it's a small child, no, it's absolutely unexcusable. And there's a lot of sick people out there, extremely sick people, parents who would videotape themselves doing these horrific sexual things to their children and babies, and then selling these pictures off or trading them off. And they bust these people all the time, and it's great, but they don't bust nearly enough of them, and that's the sad part. That for every, the FBI said for every 600 they bust, 900 appear. So they'll bust 600 people, but then right after that there's 900 new ones out there doing this stuff. That tells you there's so many child sexual predators and pedophiles out there. They're all over the place, and sadly enough, they live right next to you and me. They live right next to us all, and they do what they do. They abuse children, rape children, do whatever they do. Then they drive down the street the next day looking just like everybody else, you know what I mean? Sadly enough, this is the case, right? We work with these people, we talk to them. They are part of our society. They're a plague, but what are you going to do? Sadly enough, the kids are suffering, and everybody's protecting the child sexual predators, you know what I mean? Which is very, very sad, because it's the children that need protection, you know what I mean? And, it's sad. It's just absolutely pathetic that we would think more about protecting the abuser than we would the children, right? But this is what happens, and especially with this whole, child sexual exploitation and whatnot. It's absolutely ridiculous. The absence of emotional response is another psychologically damaging issue, right? To show oneself as inattentive or indifferent towards the child, to ignore the child's emotional needs, to avoid visual contact, like the parent kissing their child, telling their child that they love them, right? Verbal communication with the child, and to never congratulate them, to never show any kind of emotional response, just to completely ignore the child's emotional needs, right? And lots of parents do that, and for many reasons, I mean, sometimes it's because the parent is having their own issues and mental issues, with emotional problems and having a hard time dealing with things and just can't cope with that child. And sadly enough, the child pays the price for that, you know what I mean? But sometimes it's not on purpose. It's just that there might be some emotional problems or mental instability there on the parent's part, and they can't really show that emotional response to that child. They can't be that person for that child. You know what I mean? And I think that was my mom's case, right? I mean, in my own case, right? My mom, I know she didn't grow up and say, what do I want to be when I get older? Oh, I know, I'll be a child abuser. My mom didn't grow up, my mom she didn't start out wanting to have a career in abusing children. The whole issue is that, they, for whatever, a whole number of reasons, a whole number of things cause people to do these things. But who pays the price? The kids do. And that's why we need to know really what to look for, what the signs and the symptoms are, you know what I mean, and how to spot it. If you do know that a child's being abused, you have to do the right thing, and you have to make the phone call, and you have to get the child some help. Sadly enough, they do remove kids in error, and they, but I will always fight on the side of removing the children if there is an imminent threat or danger in the home, because we see so many babies dead. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous and sick. And a lot of times there has been a call, to CPS or DHS. There was an alert placed on that family that they could have problems, that the child might be in danger, but the child's left in the home. And then we see, 3 or 4 months later, the child's killed and dead, and you can never bring that child back. I would say get the kid out of the home and then just see how the family goes, see how the parents go, see if they can, go to counseling, straighten up their act, do whatever they got to do to prove that they're going to look after this child or their children. And, and then with counseling and with people stepping in, make sure that they're not going to hurt their children before they allow them to go back in the home, right? And that's the ideal situation, because it's not that people want to necessarily rip families apart. It's the fact that if the child's life is in danger, then we have to do what we have to do to save children's lives. You know what I mean? And so many people think it's perfectly okay to bash their children's head in. You know what I mean? Like my mom thought that was perfectly fine. She didn't consider that abuse at all, right? Of course I did, because my head was cracked, and you know what I mean, like she could have killed me. And that was, my mom thought that it was perfectly okay to do this to your children, right? So that some people don't know what they're doing is abuse, you know what I mean? And they think it's great, and they just think that it's fine, and it's actually not, right? So many people cry the blues when they get their children removed from the home, and they're crying and they're out there, oh, they took our children away. It's like, well, what were you doing to those children? You know what I mean? That's my question. It's like, if they took the children out of the home, okay, what were you doing to them? Because usually they don't remove them. They didn't remove us from our home, you know what I mean? And there was direct abuse going on. So I'd like to know what you were doing to that child, or somebody in the home, not necessarily the one who's crying about it, but somebody in the home was doing something, because they don't just pop kids out for no reason. I know people who go and save kids' lives, and they don't take children from decent homes, you know what I mean? Because there's nowhere to put them. So why would they take a kid from a decent home? I know that there's got to be people that slip through the cracks, just like we slip through the cracks, you know what I mean? And all these dead babies in these body bags out here tonight and tomorrow and the next night, they've all slipped through the cracks. But the whole issue is that I think it's better to give a child a chance to live, instead of just leaving them in the home. And because this is absolutely horrific. So we all need to know the signs and symptoms. We need to protect children at all costs, because they can't stand up for themselves. That's why it's such an issue with me. It's because children can't have absolutely no way of defending themselves. They cannot get help unless we get help for them. And obviously the people who are abusing them are not going to get them help. You know what I mean? Oh, I have a good friend in the chat room and some other guests here. Thanks very much for being here. That's awesome. So it's just very sad to see what people would do to their children. Neglect is another issue. To ignore the health or educational needs of the child, to refuse or to neglect to apply the required treatment. For instance, if the child is on medication, or has to have something like asthma, any number of types of medication or whatnot, and the parent actually just refuses to, or neglects to give the proper treatment to their child, that's horrible. That's absolutely horrible. But we know it happens. And it's just sad and wrong, right? Because these children are counting on the adult in the situation to do the right thing. They're counting on it. They need it. They have to have the adult. Children cannot, at the age of 2, just go out and bring themselves up. Oh, I guess I'll go get a job and I'll go out and get married and have a couple kids. The children need someone who's going to look after them properly. You know what I mean? And so many don't get that, and that is just so sad, right? They talk about showing a lack of regard for the child. They said this behavior often includes rejecting the child by not showing affection, ignoring the child's presence and obvious needs, ignoring the child when he or she is in need of comfort, not calling the child by his or her name, and that happens. Parents will not use their child's name, and they'll just call them it or whatever, or other names, right? Other choice names, right, that parents quite often like to call their children. Saying unkind things to the child, right? Emotionally abusive parents say things or convey feelings that can hurt a child deeply. Common examples include making the child feel unwanted, perhaps by stating or implying that life would be easier without the child. For example, a parent may tell a child, "I wish you were never born." And I guess I don't know if every parent's told their child that, you know what I mean? But most people that I talk to said that they have heard that from their parents. And that's really sad. My parents told me that. Not so much my dad. My dad was just saying he should kill me. But my mom was quite often saying that she had wished that I had died or never been born. And that's very sad. And, it's not right. Ridiculing or belittling the child, right, such as saying you're stupid or calling them names, right? That's not right. It's so damaging. Threatening the child with harsh punishment or even death, continuous verbal abuse, right? This is systematic abuse. It's very systematic. It's ongoing, and this is why it's abuse, right? No parent's perfect, and sometimes parents, they lash out and say something they don't mean. Best thing you can do in that situation is apologize to your child and then remember not to do it again, and then talk to your child why that happened, so that they understand that you might have been stressed out, that no one's perfect, and you didn't mean to hurt them. My parents would hurt us, and they would just thought it was great. You know what I mean? There was no apologies. And it was like, yeah, that's what you get. You deserve that, And they never tried to say, oh, we're so sorry. We should never have done that or said that. So that's the difference between abusers and parents who just make a mistake, and act and say something hurtful to their child and then make up for it, right? There's a real big difference, right? So I guess we'll have to continue on with this Wednesday night. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll pick up where we left off and talk about the impact of psychological abuse on children and take a look from there. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I really appreciate it, and hope you have a great night. I'll be back on tomorrow morning, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, probably about 8 o'clock a.m. Mountain Standard Time. I'm going to bump the show up a couple of hours, and I'll be back on tomorrow night, Dreamcatchers Talk Radio, www.blogtalkradio.com/Dreamcatchers, and we'll be talking about the headlines. And I'm thinking it'll be Elizabeth Brawley and myself, but it might just be me. And have a great night, everybody. If you need some information or any of the resources or information that I've been, using on my shows here, just let me know, because I know how to get a hold of it all. And if I can do anything for you, let me know. I'm on Facebook and Blog Talk Radio. And have a great night, and we'll talk to you again. Bye-bye.